What's the worst grass type Pokemon? This seems like a question that should be easy to answer, but the problem is that there's just a ton of grass type Pokemon, and a lot of them are not very good. Grass types are some of the most common in every single Pokemon game, and when I've learned about the series where I go through and figure out what the worst Pokemon of each type is, the more Pokemon there are, the harder it becomes to narrow down the worst ones. Now I do want to clarify that I'm only speaking from a competitive angle here. I'm not talking about design or like how beloved these Pokemon are. In fact, many of the Pokemon that I've put on this list, I personally like a lot, but I did still put them here. Now, when I've made the other videos in this series, the very first thing that I've done is I've gone through and I've looked for competitive results for any of the Pokemon that I think are some of the worst of all time. And if a Pokemon has even like a little bit of usage, then I don't know, I at least consider it when I'm ranking them. Like at least somebody thought they were good enough to use, right? The thing about this list is that all 10 of the Pokemon that I put here have 0 recorded usage. Now, that doesn't mean that they have 0 usage like ever. It just means that the website that keeps track of these things, there's nothing there. So this made it a bit difficult to rank the Pokemon within themselves because I had literally no data to go off of. So what I've done is I've ranked these Pokemon from the least bad to the most bad based on how easy or hard I think it would be to actually use them if you were like this Pokemon's #1 fan in specifically competitive play. So coming in at number 10 is a personal favorite Pokemon of mine, Meganium. I like Meganium a lot. Chikorita was like my favorite Pokemon as a kid. And to Meganium's credit, there are 9 grass types that are worse than it. So even though it is the worst starter Pokemon, it's not the worst grass type. Now, I also feel like I should preface this that I'm recording this prior to Legends ZA coming out, and I believe that Meganium will get a buff or a new form in these games. So if, Colosian Meganium turns out to be super turbo broken, I didn't know, okay? Don't yell at me in the comments. Based on the first like 20 years of Meganium's life so far though, it hasn't really put up a good showing. Meganium is a pure grass type, and grass is like an okay type overall. It has some nice benefits, like resisting ground is nice, resisting water is nice, resisting electric is nice, but you do have a lot of weaknesses, and so many of the best grass type Pokemon prefer to have a secondary type. It's not mandatory, but it is often helpful. So being a pure grass type isn't doing Meganium any favors. I think the real issue though with Meganium is the stats, and the stats, to Meganium's credit, are not the worst of all time. I would say that Meganium's bulk is good and its speed is at least usable. Like those aren't the issue here. The main problem is that in competitive play, you need all your Pokemon to be contributing something, and this doesn't necessarily need to be damage, like some Pokemon that aren't really known for their, damaging capabilities are some of the best ever, just because they offer such good support. The problem is that Meganium's offenses are quite lacking, but it also doesn't really have those great supporting moves to support its team. It doesn't get Rage Powder, it doesn't get Sleep Powder, moves that are, kind of common on grass type Pokemon. It can do some stuff, like it has Heal Pulse, it can set up Reflect and Light Screen. It has some interesting moves that have some utility, like Knockoff. Maybe you could do something with like Helping Hand or Leech Seed. Like it has some options, which is why it's not the worst Pokemon on this list. But at the same time, there is kind of the elephant in the room, which is if you wanted a kind of a mid grass type Pokemon to use these moves, there are better options. One of the downsides of having so many grass type Pokemon is that some of the ones that are not so good, it becomes even harder to justify using them because there's often just a strict upgrade somewhere else. Anyway, I do really like Meganium, so I'm hopeful that when Legends ZA comes out, it will make this video wrong, and Meganium will suddenly become very good. I don't know how likely that is, but I don't think it's impossible. What is possible, you ask? It's possible you could pull a sick graded card thanks to this video's sponsor, Arena Club. If you're here, you're probably a Pokemon fan, right? You're probably interested in the trading card game as well. Arena Club offers the easiest way to score real, graded cards seamlessly, ripping packs digitally and getting your pulls shipped straight to your door. Open digital packs starting at just $25 with real graded cards inside. Every pack is totally transparent with exact pull rates. And if you're not happy with what you pull, you can accept a trade back offer from Arena Club or auction it off to other users. Check out special pack drops on the site, like this Charizard only pack. I hope they make a Burmy only pack. Each of these special drops does only last for 48 hours or until inventory is gone, whichever comes first. I just opened up a slab pack and I pulled this cool Lucario and Melmetal GX. I didn't actually play the trading card game when they were making these tag team Pokemon, so this is new for me. I have actually, here's a fun fact, this is not really part of the sponsor, but I'm tell you anyway. I've started recently, I'm trying to collect all of Holon Phantoms. It was my favorite set as a kid. Now I currently have none of the rares, except for that Cradilly that I found from my childhood binder. I just have the uncommons and commons. But there was a Mewtwo Gold Star that was a Grail card in the pack that I opened. I had like a 2 in 1,000 chance of pulling it. And wouldn't you know it, I didn't pull it. But I'm gonna get that Mewtwo Gold Star. Anyway, this Lucario Melmetal is pretty cool as well. I've never submitted cards for grading before, so this is technically my first PSA 10. Also, I kind of forget that Melmetal's a Pokemon sometimes, so this is a good reminder for me. Anyway, if you like opening packs and you like graded cards, this could be your turn to rip. Get 20% off your first slab pack at arenaclub.com/Wolfey and use code Wolfey. And if you get the Mewtwo Gold Star, send me a picture. Bye-bye. Coming in at number 9 is Sawsbuck. Sawsbuck is certainly one of the worst grass types of all time, but I would say that we're not really in like the turbo bad category yet. Like if you know, were like, Wolf, for a YouTube video, you have to use Sawsbuck, I would be like, oh, that's gonna be tough, but I wouldn't be like, oh my God, like this is a disaster. You know what I mean? Sawsbuck, to its credit, is a grass and normal type Pokemon. And actually the normal typing, there's a funny story with this Pokemon that I have to tell. But first we should talk about what it does generally, which is the stats are pretty okay. It doesn't have any good stats, but I would say across the board, there aren't any like glaring holes. Like it's okay. It's kind of fast and the bulk isn't good, but it's not abysmal. And the attack isn't good, but it's also not abysmal. Like all the stats are workable, although the biggest problem with Sawsbuck is that, like Meganium, its offensive stats are pretty low. They are slightly higher than Meganium, or at least the attack stat is, but like 100 base attack is still not very good in the grand scheme of things. And given that you are not very bulky, it makes Sawsbuck quite difficult to use. The funny things about Sawsbuck really, to me, lie in its abilities. Sawsbuck is one of the most broken abilities in the game called Serene Grace, which is Togekiss and Jirachi's abilities. Serene Grace doubles the chance that any move with a secondary effect will happen. So if you had a 30% chance of flinching Air Slash and you have Serene Grace, that becomes 60%. This is a really good ability and it makes Pokemon very scary when they have this ability. However, at least for a while, Sawsbuck had basically no moves that could activate this. Like if you had Rock Slide, you might be able to justify using it because Rock Slide hits both targets, has a 30% chance to flinch each one. That's really good if you have Serene Grace doubling it, right? But the best move that Sawsbuck has that can actually activate Serene Grace is Headbutt, which is a move that basically sees zero play. It's a relatively, I mean, it's a middling power normal type move with admittedly a 30% chance to flinch, but still, like it's not very good. I think if Sawsbuck had a wider move pool, it would definitely like at least be considered on certain teams, but it doesn't. That being said, I do have a funny Sawsbuck story, which is that sometime in the last year, there was this team that was doing quite well in the ladder that featured Calyrex Shadow Rider. Calyrex Shadow, one of the best Pokemon in the game. And this specific Calyrex Shadow was running Protect. I forget if it was Nasty Plot, it might have been Calm Mind, some setup move, right? Signature move Astro Barrage, but the last move was Giga Drain. And I think it had like Life Orb and Terra Grass. And the idea was basically you power up your Calyrex and then you have a ton of healing with Giga Drain, right? And I had a friend who was like really tired of losing to this strategy. And so what he did is he put Sawsbuck on his team and just played a bunch of games because he wanted to queue up into the Shadow Rider like player's team to make them worried, because Sawsbuck also has the ability Sap Sipper, which makes it immune to grass type moves. And with Sap Sipper making you immune to Giga Drain and your normal typing making you immune to Astro Barrage, you actually hard-walled Calyrex Shadow with Sawsbuck. That being said, these teams also, I think, often ran Urshifu, and so I don't even think Sawsbuck worked when he used it, but this was kind of the only time that I've heard about Sawsbuck ever, and I thought it was a funny story. This video is part of a series that I've done with the worst water and the worst fire types being done before this. If you're enjoying it, make sure you subscribe. Otherwise, YouTube might not show you the videos as they come out. Also, it supports all the people who work on this channel. Doesn't hurt to do. Just overall, hopefully a win-win for both of us. Come on, I mean, you love a bargain, right? Anyway, coming in at number 8 is Gogoat. Gogoat I like because the name is fun to say, Gogoat. So like Sawsbuck, Gogoat is a normal and grass type Pokemon. And I would say that in some ways it's slightly better than Sawsbuck, at least in terms of the bulk. It's pretty bulky, genuinely, like 123 base HP. Defense is a little bit low, but we'll get to that in a second. Special defense is totally workable, and it has the same base attack stat. However, it is a good bit slower, and speed is really important in competitive Pokemon, especially when your Pokemon like doesn't have a ton of usage and doesn't have that much to do. You really want to be attacking it first. So I would say Gogoat and Sawsbuck are similar in a lot of ways, and similar in where they fall on my ranking, but I put Gogoat slightly worse because it is slower. Now I like Gogoat because it has a signature ability called Grass Pelt. This ability increases its defense stat by 50%, which is quite good, but only when the grassy terrain is active. Grassy terrain being active also gives Gogoat a boost to all its grass type moves and gives it a little healing, so it really likes to be in grassy terrain. The problem is that Gogoat is a grass type, and you often don't want multiple grass types on your team, and when you do, you want them to be doing like pretty different things. Like you could have like Kartana and Rillaboom, or maybe a Moongus and Rillaboom, but those are both like examples where the Pokemon are so good. Like those are just some of the best Pokemon in the format, so you are okay having two grass types on your team. Gogoat plus Rillaboom is probably not the best. I think if you really wanted to make Gogoat work, you would probably want to do it when Rillaboom was super popular, so you didn't have to set the grass up yourself. And maybe you have a team that like kind of baits Rillaboom to come in. But the thing is that even with 50% more defense, it's not, well, I guess it's a little bit bulky. It's not so bad. Gogoat is also a grass type with recovery, although many of them have synthesis. Gogoat has Milk Drink, which I'm not getting into there. I'm not exploring that one. Okay, you can think about that one in your own time if you want. And with recovery, and I've been calling it decent bulk, but I think actually it's pretty good bulk, especially in the grassy terrain. I would say that it's a pretty tanky Pokemon. Kind of suffers in the same way Meganium does though, which is it's difficult for Gogoat to actually contribute to a battle. Number 7 on my list is Eldegoss, a Pokemon that I actually personally have used before, albeit in an unofficial online tournament for fun. I find Eldegoss to be especially disappointing, not only as someone who used it, but because I really like its ability Cotton Down. Cotton Down is a really cool ability where every time Eldegoss gets hit by an attack, it lowers the speed of all Pokemon except for itself by 1 stage. In theory, you should be able to do a lot of really creative things with this. For example, you can pair Eldegoss with a Pokemon with an ability like Clear Body, which prevents the stats from being lowered. And then if the opponent attacks Eldegoss, they just like get speed dropped and you don't get speed dropped on your side, which is pretty good. You could also pair it with a Pokemon with the ability Contrary, which reverses stat drops and stat boosts. So instead of getting a speed drop from Cotton Down, you would get a speed boost. And at first glance, Eldegoss might seem like not that bad, especially if you look at its stats. I wouldn't go so far as to say that they're good, but the defenses are both pretty high, especially the special defense stat, and the HP, while low, isn't like the lowest thing ever, so it's workable for sure. Both special attack and its speed stats are pretty low, but with a unique ability, you could see this kind of filling almost, I don't want to say an Amoonguss-like role, but like that kind of grass type where you're using it for its supporting capabilities, not its damage or its speed. However, Game Freak did a thing that I suspect they do somewhat often, which I think when they make signature abilities, sometimes they get worried that the Pokemon will be too strong, or they made the ability just to show off that they could make the ability, but they don't actually want it to get used. And so even though they didn't give Eldegoss especially threatening stats, they gutted it because they didn't give it any moves. Eldegoss is one of the least diverse move pools of any grass type Pokemon in the dex, as far as I can tell at least. It doesn't get any powder moves, including Rage Powder, which would have excellent synergy with its ability, or Sleep Powder, which would make it hard to ignore. It also doesn't get Spore. It does get Sing, but like I'm not using Sing Eldegoss, you know what I mean? And other than that, the only good supporting moves that it gets is like Helping Hand, which every Pokemon gets, and Pollen Puff, which admittedly is a good move, but it's not alone enough to justify using Eldegoss, especially given the stats aren't that good. If this thing had even like a couple good supporting moves, I'm not even talking about broken ones. You know, like you don't need to give it Spore, but if it had Sleep Powder, you know what I mean? Like you could justify using it. But the problem basically was that in order to make Eldegoss useful, you need your opponent to attack it. But because Eldegoss isn't contributing anything, there's no reason to attack it. You can just ignore it every turn. So I find Eldegoss to be quite disappointing. It's not the worst grass type of all time, but it is one of them. Okay, coming in at number 6 is Simisage. Now, Simisear and Simipour, the equivalents to Simisage in the fire and water typing, appeared on those lists as well, but I think Simisage comparatively is better. And this is funny because I don't think that Simisage is the best of the 3 monkeys. Like I think the water one is probably the best, but the problem is that there's just so many bad grass types that, yeah, Simisage kind of wins by default here, getting outside of the top 5, despite the fact that it's not a very good Pokemon. The main thing about Simisage is that it's actually pretty fast. It's just barely over the base 100 threshold where a lot of important Pokemon sit. It's not the fastest Pokemon ever, but it is fast enough. Simisage isn't very bulky, but it's also not so frail, and it's not very strong, but it's also like, it's got a usable special attack stat, though it's not a good one. The main way that you would want to use Simisage if you're, Simisage #1 fan is with Nasty Plot, setting itself up and then attacking. Grass is not the best offensively, and Simisage has a pretty poor move pool, so this wouldn't be the easiest combo to pull off. But maybe if you used it in Generation with like Terastallization, where you could increase your move pool coverage, like, I don't know, maybe it could get something done. Alternatively, Simisage, although it's not very strong, has a better physical move pool compared to its special move pool. It gets moves like Knock Off and Superpower and Gunk Shot, or at least it did the last time it was in the game, which is Generation 7. So if you wanted to use it, you could try using like, I don't know, a fast-ish physical attacker with like, I don't know, grass move, 2 coverage moves like Knock Off Superpower and Knock Off Gunk Shot. It's not good, okay, but it's at least I can think of something for it to do, which I feel like now we're getting into kind of the more difficult category of Pokemon to use. Our top 5 begins with number 5, Cacturne. I like Cacturne. I don't know if this is a popular opinion, but I think the design is kind of cool. Like, I think it's a cool looking Pokemon. Cacturne is actually in Scarlet and Violet, which is something that I forgot. I do like the shiny form of Cacturne. I think it looks pretty cool, especially because it, like, I don't know, I always think of it in Generation 3 being found in the desert, and I like the idea that it looks like it's, kind of camouflaged in the sand. So I don't know, I like Cacturne. It's not very good. Cacturne is a dual type Pokemon. It's grass and dark type, which is, as we said, pretty good. I mean, it's not great defensively. You get some important weaknesses. You end up with a quadruple weakness to bug, but like at this point, we'll take what we can get. Cacturne is kind of cool because it has 2 abilities that interact with weather in different ways. It gets Sand Veil to make it its evasion go up in the sand. I would say that in general, this is less useful because as a dark type Pokemon, probably don't want to pair it with Tyranitar because they share a lot of the same weaknesses. But of course, you have the option, or maybe you'd want to use Gigalith or Hippowdon or one of the other sand setters, right? The more common ability that I would expect to see on it is Water Absorb, which gives it an immunity to water. This isn't the biggest deal because yes, you're immune to water now. However, you already resisted water. So like imagine it had, I mean, it doesn't make sense thematically, but imagine it had Flash Fire, right? Then that would actually, give it an additional, like it would cancel out one of its weaknesses, whereas Water Absorb cancels out one of its resistances or upgrades one of its resistances, I should say. Still good abilities in a vacuum and like you're not upset to have them. Cacturne is quite slow and also has pretty disappointing bulk. And that's a big reason why it's on this list in the first place. But if you really wanted to use Cacturne, it does have, I think maybe the highest special attack and attack stats of anything on our list thus far. And these stats aren't great, but they're definitely closer to good than they are to bad, if that makes sense. Cacturne is really slow, which is a problem, but it also gets the priority move Sucker Punch, which is a pretty strong priority move. So I'm not saying it would be easy to use Cacturne. Like, we're certainly well into the bad category of Pokemon now, but it does still have some things that it can do. And actually, I think that's kind of neat, right? Like, this is the 5th worst grass type Pokemon of all time, if you believe my ranking. And yet, despite this being one of the worst, there's still things that it can do. Like, you could still use it. It wouldn't necessarily be the strongest Pokemon of all time. And like you might be better off with another Pokemon if you wanted to use something similar, but you could use Cacturne. I think that's kind of something neat, that even some of the worst grass types, I think at least, are still usable. Cacturne also has some interesting moves. It's not a grass type that I would say is hurting for. Switcheroo is interesting. It can change its item with an opponent. Fell Stinger is a really cool move that basically never sees any play, but it's a move that gives you a huge attack buff, but only if you KO the target. Belch is a move that doesn't see much play, but is quite strong. Endeavor, Knockoff, Grassy Glide's another one. You could use Grassy Glide to get another form of priority. It has some setup moves like Nasty Plot and Curse. It also gets Spiky Shield, which is just an upgraded version of Protect. Overall, pretty bad Pokemon, but still some interesting things that it can do. Okay, top 4 time, and this is the divide where I started having a really hard time ranking these Pokemon because they're all really, really bad. And so what I ended up doing is I started looking for anything that I could use to justify using these Pokemon, and I found some stuff. And so like all the remaining Pokemon on this list are quite terrible, but I've done my best to rank them the way that I think is the most fair. So coming in at number 4 is Maractus. I think this is quite a forgettable Pokemon, except for the fact that people love to kind of dunk on it as being like one of the worst grass types ever, which is fair because it is one of the worst grass types ever. I actually think if anything, people are going to be surprised that it isn't higher up on my list. So Maractus has trouble, okay? This is a Pokemon that I feel like at some point they're gonna at least think about giving it an evolution because it has such terrible stats across the board. Bulk is not good. Speed is bad. Special attack, I mean, I think I'm kind of biased because like I've been looking at such bad Pokemon. It's about the same as Sawsbuck. It's slightly higher than the attack of Gogoat and Sawsbuck. So 106, not good, okay? Really, none of these stats are good. Also, as a pure grass type, it's just like limited in what it can do, both in terms of typing and move pool. This thing's move pool is basically almost as limited as Eldegoss, although it also gets Spiky Shield like Cacturne. Actually, also like Cacturne, it also gets Sucker Punch, which is neat. Basically, Maractus is really bad. Like, I can't say that many good things about it, but the reason why it's not higher up on the list has to do with its ability. So also like Cacturne, I guess this is just a cactus Pokemon thing. It gets Water Absorb, but it also is a better version of Water Absorb in Storm Drain. Storm Drain not only makes you immune to water type moves, it also gives you a special attack boost whenever you're hit by one, but more importantly, it also redirects any water type moves aimed at another Pokemon on the field into the Storm Drain user. So if the Kyogre is about to, Hydro Pump your Terrafire Koraidon, Maractus will save it, unless they use a spread move like Origin Pulse or Water Spout, in which case you're dead anyway. Storm Drain is such a good ability that I think it can single-handedly improve a Pokemon's viability by a couple stages. However, Maractus is nowhere near the best Storm Drain user, so it's kind of hard to justify using it. I said abilities though, as an ability plural, and it wasn't because of Water Absorb. The other ability Maractus gets is Chlorophyll, which will double its speed in the sun. And there are many better Chlorophyll Pokemon, but Maractus does get the move After You. We've seen After You used with Chlorophyll Pokemon before with the Lilligants, as they can use After You on their own Torkoal to allow Eruption to immediately fire off, which is a really, really threatening combination attack. Now, you would basically never use Maractus over Lilligant because it's slower, it's just worse across the board, it's less threatening, doesn't get Sleep Powder. But in a really specific set of circumstances where we were playing a metagame where there were no other Chlorophyll After You Pokemon and Torkoal was quite strong, I could see a world where Chlorophyll Maractus could do something on somebody's niche gimmicky team. Again, I am doing my best to make these Pokemon theoretically work. It's not easy, but I hope I find something. Okay, before we get into the top 3, let's talk through some honorable mentions. The Pokemon I was closest to putting on this list, but I ended up leaving off, was Shiinotic. Shiinotic is basically a worse version of Amoonguss. However, like Amoonguss, it also gets the move Spore, and it gets Strength Sap, and so I thought, well, okay, it's not very good, but at the very least, it has something that it can do, and so, yeah, I decided to leave it off the list. Some Pokemon you might expect to see in this list that I didn't put here include Victory Bell. Victory Bell actually had some use back in the day. Not a ton, but a little bit, just as like a Chlorophyll Weather Ball special attacker. Shiftry as well was used with Fake Out and Tailwind, as well as Chlorophyll plus Explosion, I think at some point. Tropius is a Pokemon people might have expected, but Tropius actually topped the ladder at one point during Scarlet and Violet, I think because of Wide Guard Leech Seed making it really hard to hit in one specific format. Tangrowth is not a very good grass type Pokemon, but Tangela saw a little bit of use by one player back in, I think, 2013. Cherrim actually was a world champion in the senior division, or maybe it was junior division actually, back in, I think, 2010, paired with Groudon. I like Cherrim a lot personally. If it was in the game, I would try to use it. Is it in the game? Wait, I should check, because I might try to use it. Nope, Charm's not in the game, but I think the ability is really cool. Certainly not one of the worst grass types. Other Pokemon that I was considering for this list because they don't really have much use, but I thought would be easier to use than any of the Pokemon on this list include Vileplume, who I feel like maybe did something at some point. Same thing with Blossom. Like Chlorophyll users, they're not good Chlorophyll users, but they can at least do something, right? Hisuian Electrode hasn't seen much usage, but because it's so fast, I figured, yeah, like surely it could do something. Torterra is a Pokemon that isn't like a great grass type Pokemon, but is certainly like good enough to keep it off this list. Leafeon I was initially considering, but I've used Leafeon before. I got to number 1 in the world in Sword and Shield with Leafeon, and I thought it was like pretty good in that format, so I decided to leave it off. Leaveney is another Pokemon that I almost put on the list, but decided not to. It's just like it has slightly better stats than a lot of these Pokemon and a little bit more to do, so I left it off. And then Flapple, but I'm pretty sure Flapple was a Dynamax attacker at some point with Hustle, so decided to leave Flapple off the list. There's a lot of bad grass types, and I didn't even mention them all here, so yeah, you can see perhaps why this list was difficult. Okay, top 3 time, and coming in at number 3 is the Pokemon I think many of you are expecting to see at number 1, which is Sunflora. Sunflora is kind of notorious as being one of the worst Pokemon ever. I guess Sunkern is genuinely thought of as like one of the weakest Pokemon of all time. Sunflora is not a good Pokemon, okay? It's a pure grass type Pokemon. Its stats are really bad. Its move pool is not very good. However, there is one thing that you could do with Sunflora if you really like it, okay? Sunflora gets the ability Chlorophyll, but the problem is that it's so slow that it cannot make use of this ability. Sunflora is the same base speed as Amoonguss, and even doubling Amoonguss's speed is not going to do very much. Like you're still not outspeeding a lot of the faster Pokemon with max speed Sunflora in the sun. You don't outspeed like Sneasler. I don't even think you outspeed like Tornadus. Maybe you get Tornadus, but like, yeah, you're not getting Whimsicott. You're slower than Whimsicott with max speed Sunflora, okay, in the sun. However, Sunflora has another ability which also powers it up in the sunlight, which is Solar Power. This ability is most often used on Charizard to give it a ridiculous power boost. Basically, this move gives you a power boost to all your attacks in the strong sunlight. If you really wanted to use Sunflora, what you could do is go for a Trick Room strategy with Sun, so you could use like Torkoal, a Trick Room Setter, Sunflora, and you could use the fact that Sunflora actually has good coverage moves, okay? You run Protect, you run a Grass move, you run Earth Power, and you run Weather Ball, which is a 100 base power Fire type move, okay? With Solar Power in the sun, with Life Orb, you hit decently hard. You're not the strongest Pokemon of all time, but you can justify using Sunflora. And it is very slow, which makes it a good Trick Room attacker. So like you could use Sunflora and I don't know, maybe you KO Amoonguss with Life Orb, Weather Ball in the sun. Probably you do, but I don't know for sure. The issue is that if you wanted to do this, it would require so much setup, and most of the time, like if you had Torkoal inside Trick Room, you wouldn't need to be switching in Sunflora anyway. But if you really wanted to use Sunflora, this is the best way that I can think to do it. I know it's really specific and really niche, but okay, I am really working with what I have here, okay? And I don't have much. I went back and forth on the number 1 and number 2 worst grass types of all time. But in the end, I've decided that for number 2, I'm going with Carnivine. Carnivine is a Pokemon that I'm really disappointed by because I love the design, but the Pokemon is just so bad. Like, it's so bad. Carnivine is a pure grass type Pokemon with similarly to Sunflora, just abysmal stats. It's basically the same attack and bulk as Sawsbuck, but it's a lot slower, which is like, I mean, they downgraded Sawsbuck basically, which is not a good thing to say. With no secondary typing and pretty bad stats and being very, very slow, it's really hard to justify Carnivine in any context. Carnivine has the Levitate ability, which like is not super helpful on a grass type because one of the main reasons you run a grass type Pokemon is because they already resist ground type moves. It's like, I'm not gonna say it's a waste of an ability, like it is technically an upgrade. It's better than it getting like, I don't know, Runaway or something that literally does nothing, but it has one ability and the ability is not especially helpful for it. Its offensive move pool is also pretty terrible, to be honest. Like it has basically no coverage moves. And as a grass type, because there's so many types that resist your attacks, you really want to have some coverage moves so you can do something in front of fire, flying, bug, grass, poison, steel. Like maybe there's more types that resist you, right? Dragon, I didn't even mention dragon, right? So if you don't have any coverage moves, you're basically soft walled by most Pokemon in the format. However, the one thing that I will say about Carnivine, the only thing that I think Carnivine is going for it is the fact that it has some good supporting moves. Specifically, Carnivine gets Rage Powder, which I think thematically makes sense because it makes me very mad, and it also gets Sleep Powder. Now, if you wanted to use a Rage Powder and Spore Pokemon or a Rage Powder and Sleep Powder Pokemon, there are many better options. Venonat is unironically a better option than Carnivine here, or like in most circumstances. But if Carnivine is your favorite Pokemon and you really want to find some way to make it work, Rage Powder and Sleep Powder are at least good moves. It also does get Acid Spray. Again, Venonat is better in every way than this set, but you could run like Rage Powder, Trick Room, and then Acid Spray and attack with your Trick Room setter. It's not good, okay? And I can't pretend that it's good. I'm so sorry, but you could use it, okay? And that's worth something. It's enough to keep it out of the number 1 slot. Because the worst grass type Pokemon and the number 1 Pokemon on my list, I truly could not find any way to justify using it. The worst grass type Pokemon is Wormadam. Wormadam has 3 different forms, but this is the worst grass type list, so I'm only talking about the grass type one. I also think of the 3 Wormadams, the grass type one also happens to be the worst. The problem is that Wormadam just has nothing to do. Offenses are really, really rough. Like even base 100, which many of the Pokemon on this list have had, I've said is bad, and Wormadam is below 20 points of that. It's also supremely slow, and it's not frail, but like just being bulky is not enough to justify using a Pokemon. You know what I mean? So it has okay bulk, bad speed, bad offenses, and its move pool, like it just doesn't allow it to do very much. Genuinely, the best thing that I could see for Wormadam to do is to use a move that does set damage over time, like Infestation, and try and stall. But as a grass and bug type, you have a ton of weaknesses. Both your types are weak to fire, both your types are weak to flying, you're weak to ice, you're weak to poison, you're weak to rock, you're weak to bug. Like you have all these weaknesses. You do have a couple useful resistances, but like it's not enough to justify using Wormadam. It feels a little like a sick joke because they actually gave Wormadam one of the best moves in the game in Quiver Dance. Quiver Dance raises your speed, your special attack, and your special defense in one move. And the thing is, because it does get Quiver Dance, you could almost justify using it because this move is just so good. Like Wormadam's bad special attack and special defense stats, you know, if you improve them by 50%, suddenly it becomes a bit more threatening. Maybe use Giga Drain for recovery because you're a grass type. It's something, right? Like I would almost be able to say, oh, you could do this with Wormadam. The problem is the speed is so unbelievably low that even after 2 Quiver Dances, you're still going to be slower than a lot of Pokemon in the format. And that's assuming you want to invest in your speed stat, which frankly you probably don't. And even if you did manage to pull off 2 or 3 Quiver Dances, you don't have very many good coverage moves. Of course you can use Bug Buzz, but again, like a lot of the types that resist grass also resist bug. And other than that, you're looking at like Psychic or Shadow Ball. Like there's just not very many good options. I didn't even talk about the ability, by the way, which is Anticipation, which is effectively worthless in an official tournament, or Overcoat, which is a really good ability normally because it protects the user from powder moves, except for the fact that Wormadam as a grass type is already immune to powder moves. So really the only benefit of Overcoat is that you don't take damage from Sandstorm. That's literally all that it does. Basically in every single dimension, Wormadam is just really a disappointment. And I think that this is the one Pokemon on this list where if you were like, Wolf, I love Wormadam grass for me, like I really want to use it. Like this is the one Pokemon that I really can't see working unless your opponent just really messes up. I'm sorry to all the Wormadam lovers, and I'm only speaking about the grass one here, okay? Maybe the steel of the ground one have a little bit more to do, but the grass one is just a disaster. Anyway, those are the 10 worst grass type Pokemon according to me. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did and you want another video like this one, go check out the worst water type.